Welcome. We've got a lot to discuss this morning, so I think we should get going. I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar this morning. I'm Simon Blake. I'm the Chief Exec of Mental Health First Aid England. It's my absolute pleasure to be relaunching the My Whole Self campaign, which we started in March this year with the aim to create a shift in workplace cultures which really understood the links between identity, between people's experience of work and being able to take the whole self to work, and their mental health and well-being. As part of that campaign, we did a second series of the podcast just about coping, and Ada Paris, our new chair, was one of the guests on that. So after this webinar, if you haven't listened to that podcast, I would recommend Ada's and of course all the others in that series as well. I think it's fair to say that last 6 months has been dominated by COVID-19 in all sorts of ways, and also by the mental health impact of COVID-19, which has been well documented and well talked about, and delighted about how much attention there has been on mental health and well-being in the workplace during that time. I think perhaps less well discussed, but equally as important, is the impact of systemic racism on Black colleagues and on people of colour. And of course, that was really amplified over the summer in response to the murder of George Floyd and the amplification of the Black Lives Matter movement. But of course, this didn't start then. It is something which has been happening for a very, very, very long time. But what we do know from talking to colleagues at MHFA England is that workplaces often don't think about the impact of those type of events on Black people and people of colour. But more importantly, as we look to the future, it's brilliant that there have been real commitments to trying to create change. But those have an impact on Black people and people of colour in the workplace. And that's what we are really seeking to focus on with the guidance which we are launching today, which is, as we do the work, and I hope that many of you will be in organisations that have committed to doing significant work to create change. And if you haven't seen MHFA England's statement of intent, I would recommend we'll put that in the chat so that you can see that, which sets out a programme and a commitment that we have made moving forward. That advice and guidance is really sort of a first marker, if you like, about raising the profile and the importance of thinking about the well-being of Black colleagues and people of colour at this time. I'm grateful to Business in the Community and Chartered Management Institute for working with us to produce that. And I know that there will be lots more learning as we move through into the future. So that's really going to be all I've got to say today, except to say again, welcome. And I will hand over to Ada, our new chair, to introduce herself before talking about the content of this webinar and handing over to Amma.
Thank you, Simon. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. It's a great honour and privilege to be introducing myself as the Chair of Mental Health First Aid England. As Simon said, my journey with Mental Health First Aid began in February when Simon interviewed me for a podcast. And we had such a wonderful discussion around my own relationship with mental health and bringing my full self, my whole self, to an organisation. And that really helped me to recognise that I wanted to do more in supporting people and helping people who may or may not recognise some of the symptoms that I had had. I also looked at, what was happening during the pandemic and this time of Black Lives Matter, but also the way that we as humans, as individuals, had to change the way that we live and work. And the question for me was about our understanding and definition of the workplace was changing because we had to go online. And that would also have profound impacts on the way that we interact with each other on people's mental health and well-being. And that would further be compounded by what was happening around Black Lives Matter, and the murder of George Floyd. And so it's with great honour and great pride that I take this role. I will not be doing this alone, and I'm really pleased to be working with Simon, Amma, and the rest of the team. And I hope that I get to meet some of you in due course. But I'm going to leave it there because I know that we're going to have quite a juicy conversation. And I look forward to meeting you all.
Thank you, Ada. So Chloe, can I ask you to just very briefly introduce yourself, and then Amma, if you could introduce yourself too?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Oh, good morning from London, I should say. My name is Chloe Davies. I'm head of PR and partnerships at Mighty Work, which is an online business community for students, graduates, business professionals, and all those who believe in true workplace equality. I'm also a volunteer for UK Black Pride and for London Queer Fashion Show, or actually it's Fashion Week this week. So yeah, we've got a lot to talk about, so I'm going to keep it short today.
Amma.
Welcome everyone. I'm going to keep it really short as well. My name is Amma Afrifa-Chi. I'm Head of Culture and Wellbeing at Mental Health First Aid England. And I'm also one of the project leads for our race equity work. Back to you, Simon.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so this webinar, can we move the slide on, Alex? So in this webinar, we're going to discuss the effect of racism on the mental health of people of colour and Black people, how organisations, leaders, managers and white colleagues can provide better support and be better allies, and why empowering people to bring their whole self to work is better for mental well-being and better for business. And with that, I'm now going to hand over to Amma, who's going to lead you through the rest of the session and kick off with a first poll.
Thanks, Simon. Yes, let's get the first poll up, please. So we can start our conversation. So can I ask the audience, to what extent do you agree with this statement? Racism and dealing with its effect has a significant negative impact of the mental health and well-being of people of colour and Black people. We can launch the poll, please. Give a couple of seconds to answer that, and then we can start the discussions. So it's strongly agree, somewhat agree, neither agree or disagree, somewhat disagree, and strongly disagree. Okay, Alex, would you mind if we could share what the answers or results are? Oh, great. So the majority, we've got a majority of 75 strongly agreeing, somewhat disagreeing 20%. And then we've got sort of a spread between 1% and 2% between neither disagree or somewhat disagree or strongly disagree. Really interesting to see the results actually peppered that across all of the sections. Ada, you did mention it before when you introduced yourself. What do you think about the effects and the negative impact that race and racism might be having on people of colour and Black people?
So I have, especially during the recent months, I've been running lots of anti-racism, diversity, inclusion sessions, workshops, some global sessions. And one of the things that come up is this understanding of, as a person of colour, you are made aware of the fact that you're Black or you're other before you have an understanding of who you are. And most of those first experiences are quite traumatic, and they stay with you for a very long time. In fact, for most people, they stay with them for their lifetime. And so then when you're in situations or environments where you are constantly being othered because of your race, because of your ethnicity, that it replicates and it brings those traumas back up. It's the same thing as when you ask, as we're in this environment now where people are trying to learn more about racism and understand it. What I think sometimes what people don't also understand or appreciate is that when you are asking somebody to share their experiences, you're also causing them to recreate the trauma, and that will have a profound impact on the mental health and well-being of people. And so, you know, that's for me is the starting point of recognizing that this goes back to right back to the time when we were first made aware that we were Black or we were other, and that discrimination starts, and that becomes a lifetime of experiences that are just built on top of that whole process.
Completely agree. And I think there's also an element that you kind of just coast through life without even just acknowledging that these daily reoccurrences, these daily experiences are actually impacting you. Because all you're doing is just trying to survive and make it through to the other day. And in order to do that, you either compartmentalize and not deal with it, or park it, because it's always a continuous stream. And ultimately, like when you keep putting pressure on something, it breaks, right? Eventually at some point. And then that point, it's a little too late. So Chloe, what are your points on and perspectives on this?
I would completely agree in the sense of, you know, the reality is that, yeah, I'm absolutely exhausted. It's my life being played out on a global stage in a way that I have been made more aware, like you said, Adam, my entire existence. You know, I say this often. My dad said to me when I was 9, you're Black and you're female. It's going to be harder for you than it is for a lot of other people. So please don't grow up with a chip on your shoulder. But I'm close to 40 now, and I have had that constant reminder. You know, it's not something that I say that like I said, it's in the back of my mind. You just know, so you're not always having a conversation with yourself, but it's like a split second where you can assess a situation and you just make the decision. Do I have the capacity to do this right now, or do I just have to get on with it? And for the most part, I just have to get on with it. Unfortunately, we've been in a situation because of COVID where I cannot escape it in any way. And then that has super compounded. So yeah, I will always strongly agree, simply because it's not having the ability to be able to just breathe through it in ways that other people don't, because then they're not Black or they're not people of color. And you know, I know that we don't have massive times that we could go on to why that is, and all the other reasons, and you know, systemic and you know, oppression and many other ways, but it all has a continuous impact, especially more so if you do work that we do, which is in some aspects being present, being visible, talking about our very experiences, our lived experience, our Black experience, and that unfortunately, whilst in sometimes incredibly joyous, always comes with trauma.
Yeah. Can I just add to that thank you, Chloe, and I just want to add to that the fact that part of the problem is that we're always on. We're always assessing our safety in situations. So regardless of which environment we're in, there is always this at the back of your head, trying to assess, how safe am I in here? Is somebody going to say something? Is it going to be a direct, you know, interpersonal racism? Is it going to be something else? Are there going to be microaggressions? And what's my escape route?
Yeah.
Who in this room, in this space, can I count on as a potential ally if something goes wrong? If somebody said something and I just don't have the capacity, mentally, emotionally, or physically, to deal with that on my own, who is going to be the ally that's going to help me with my escape route to get out of there? And that level of pressure means that you are always on. You've always got to be assessing and checking. And it's sad that, you know, we also teach our young Black children that this is going to be your life. And this is something that you have to always be aware of. And so what that does is it then means that when we talk about our whole self and bringing our whole self to work, and this was the conversation that initially started my journey with mental health first aid with Simon, is that means very different things for people of colour. Very, very different things. We cannot currently in many systems bring our whole self to work, bring our whole selves to many environments, because we're constantly, you know, it's almost like doing a jigsaw or tessellation, always moving these moves, always checking the moving pieces so that you can't really relax. And that level of pressure of always constantly working things out will have a profound impact on your mental health and well-being.
Absolutely. And I think on that point, Ada, when you're talking about bringing your whole self to work, unfortunately, we are still living in a time where we shouldn't obviously force people to bring their whole selves to work if they don't want to, but the option isn't even there, especially when you're looking at it from the lens of people of colour and Black people. And I think what's really also I would like to emphasize on that is that we all go through different experiences as the group. And also I think it's really important to acknowledge that our journeys and our experiences will be different. So it's how do we also encourage people to share those different stories to get a really good insight as to what's happening, but also to your point about allyship is understanding that it's not just one narrative and it's not just one sort of lens going through it.
And
so
I think that sometimes that's the problem with the language as well and the terminologies that you use, because it groups everybody into this kind of bracket. And then the assumption is that, well, the experience of all people of colour and Black people is the same. And there are very many different ways to be to identify, because we recognise that we are individuals. But just because people put us into a bracket, into a category, doesn't mean that our lived experiences are similar. We will experience racism in very different ways. We will have, I'm a woman approaching 50, so my experiences of that will be very different than somebody else's. And so it's sometimes putting those brackets helps to make it comfortable, but also there's a need to recognize that within that there are still multiple layers.
100%. Oh gosh, we could talk about this forever. I think we don't have time, and I would like to go on to our second poll and continue the conversation. So can we please have the second poll, please, which actually ties in quite nicely to some of the things we were talking about, which is how do you feel about talking about race and racism in the world? We could launch that. So we have here, I'm comfortable and confident doing so. I talk about it, but it makes people feel uncomfortable. I am comfortable talking about it, but I'm aware that doing so impacts me. I would like to be, but I'm worried that I would say the wrong thing and make people uncomfortable. It's not my place to talk about it. There's no need to discuss it in the workplace. Give a couple of seconds of that, and then please share the results. Okay, what do we have? Okay, so the majority are saying that I would like to, but I'm worried I will say the wrong thing or make people uncomfortable. We have then 23% saying I talk about it and but it makes people uncomfortable, and then 16% saying I'm comfortable and confident doing so. 15% saying I'm comfortable talking about it, but I'm aware that doing so impacts me. And then we have 1% that said there's no need to discuss it in the workplace. And again, I think this is really interesting and insightful in terms of where people stand and people's sort of views around discussing it in the workplace. And I think this is why we're also having this conversation today. And I think it's about, there is absolutely a need to discuss it in the workplace. And when we talk about and we look at racism and what that actual definition is about, it comes to play and it comes to light. So I think it's very much around talking about allyship in this specific ways and how people can actually bring about the conversation, to your point, Ada. So it's not just people of color or Black people having to have the responsibility and accountability to address issues or to bring out and bring to light all the time the issues that they're experiencing. Chloe, what are your thoughts about talking about racism and race and the effects it has in the workplace?
So I'll give it twofold. Because when we were talking about this in the kind of prep, I said to Alex, actually, do you know what, can we add in a new line? Because I'm the one I'm confident, I'm comfortable about talking about it, but I am very aware that it will impact on me in doing so. I think that it's really important that we have these conversations. It's about celebrating difference. I'm apologizing now if you can hear my 2-year-old through the ceiling. He's learning colors, but it's keeping him quiet for the hour. But I think that I've been aware that I am different because I've been made aware since I was 6. So that's over 30 years of being very aware of the color of my skin as I've navigated through life in all its different aspects. And the majority of my life I've been working since I was 14. So I've been working for a very long time. And when you are reminded that you are different, sometimes not only do you have to set the tone of your race, because as I've navigated through my career and I've gone through in spaces where sometimes I have been the only Black woman or I've been the only Black bi woman, and so therefore you become a representation of not only women but Black women in particular, that comes with a very different lived experience that takes some form of education on your part, because you are having to sometimes teach people how to behave and to interact with you in a positive and professional way. Not because people are mean, but because someone might not have understood your lived experience or have not seen you, they then don't understand who you are. And so it's when you're building a rapport with someone, sometimes you have to be that example. And that I have done for a very, very long time. When you're not somewhere, and you're not somewhere in the mainstream and not in abundance, then you then also have to be that example. And the only way you can do that is by talking about it. And yeah, it makes everyone 150% uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable having to explain my lived experience. But isn't this from a place of learning? You know, isn't this where we're all supposed to go? Because, you know, I can tell as a parent now, watching my children learn about other children, other people, and seeing how happily they accept the differences of others, is recognizing that it's almost a part that we lost as we came out of school and then we went into the working world, where other people told us this is how it should be. So now we're having to remind ourselves of what it really is. We see difference in the streets all the time. We just don't necessarily see it in businesses. So we have to talk about it, because that's how we usualize everybody else's existence. I talk about being a parent. I talk about being Black. I talk about being a woman. I talk about being bisexual. I talk about being a mental health survivor. I'm trying to usualize all of it, not just one part, but all of it. So if I don't bring all of that to the workplace, but also remind people that the barriers that I face to participation in a lot of different aspects are and start and stemmed in racism. And so that's why we have to have these conversations.
Absolutely, and actually half of Black Britain say that they are likely to have encountered racism in the workplace as they have experienced on the streets, according to a survey done by YouGov. So Ada, what are your thoughts on this?
I completely agree with Chloe that, you know, that, and also I want to address the 1% of there's no need to discuss this in the workplace.
Please do.
And I'll give an example. So I was part of a global conversation on diversity and inclusion, and the facilitator, the speaker, was great. And somebody, one of the audience members, asked a question, and they said, yeah, but we're in the middle of a pandemic now and we don't really have the budget, so can't we just put the diversity thing off until this next quarter? And I was asked to respond, and my response was that, so effectively what you're asking someone to do is put a facet of their identity that you're not ready to deal with on hold until you have the budget or the inclination to do that. And you can't do that. So that's like asking somebody to say, whilst you come into the work environment, you can no longer identify as being a woman, or you can no longer identify as being a man, or you can't be a parent until we have the budget or we're comfortable enough to have that conversation. Life doesn't happen like that. We don't put as Chloe says, we don't put ourselves into compartments and bring those out when other people are comfortable. We bring all of that. That is who we are. And so, and I'm not just talking about race and ethnicity here, I'm talking about all of us. We all have multiple identities. And so when we're talking about bringing our full selves to work, or bringing our full selves to anything that we do, are we asking people then that you can bring the bits that I feel comfortable with, and the bits that I don't feel comfortable with, I'm telling you that I'm not going to deal with them. That's what effectively that is saying. And I think that that's why it's important to talk about it in the workplace, especially because we spend so much time at work. It's a big part of who we are, you know, and at the moment, even whilst we are having Zoom or online calls, we're still engaging in a work environment. And that is, when we work, we're also looking at recognizing some of our potential and working to our potential, and looking at it all forms part of our identities. And so we have to have these conversations. And then to address the and I will stop soon, but just to address the bit about saying the wrong thing. The fact that you've turned up to this event today means that you are curious and you want to know and you want to change and you want to understand, and that is a starting point. And what makes it not easier, what means that, I'll speak for myself, I won't generalize, when I engage with people who are curious and who are starting to do the work for themselves, then I also recognize that sometimes people may say something clumsy. They may get the language wrong. They may not understand the nuances of it. But if we can see that people are trying to make an effort to teach themselves, to learn and to grow and to ask questions, that you can tell the difference between somebody asking a question because they want to learn and somebody asking a question for a different reason. Mm-hmm. And so I would just say that as long as you're trying to do the work and you're trying to explore and understand yourself and to educate yourself and not put the onus on other people, put the onus on Black and minority and ethnic people, then it's okay to ask and to say, look, I'm not sure, or to ask those questions, because that's how we learn.
Yeah, and I think I just wanted to add to that, because I think for me it's and I've been doing a lot of reading and research about just different things lately, and one thing that really struck with me was around compassionate curiosity, which is what you're doing when you're learning, and you can ultimately tell when somebody is trying to come from a good place of understanding and empathy versus somebody who is not. So yes, we are all on a journey, and we will get it wrong sometimes, but I think it's learning from that journey and actually then making sure that that doesn't replicate itself again, or if it does, that you're able to change it quite quickly. So I think the element about compassionate curiosity is very much also taking that point from a non-defensive space and place, and ultimately showing some vulnerability in your fragility as well, and actually being more open to just actually saying, I'm really not sure about this, and I don't know about this, and I might get it wrong, but I really want to make a difference and make it right. And that's the difference also between proactive, active allyship as opposed to reactive allyship. And I think for me, I definitely echo both your points, Ada and Chloe, around just there is a need to talk about it in the workplace. My role predominantly in my career has been about being inclusion and a diversity specialist or manager. But for most of that, my career, I have felt that I've either been brought into place to tick a box or check a box, or I brought in, but I've never been empowered to have the real conversations around race. But we're fine to talk about other things to do with diversity and inclusion when it talks about the other strands. But within that context alone, it's siloed. And like you say, we are not just one strand, we are multiple identities that can ultimately identify with the Equal Opportunity, Equality Act. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think we have to approach it from a human perspective and a human element, and actually also understand that the journeys are different. And as you say, we spend so much time in the workplace. There is very much around getting the narrative right and actually making sure that the accessibility and access to opportunities is truly for everybody. And when you don't have to start thinking about, okay, well, do I have to cover myself? Do I have to change my hair? Do I have to talk a certain way? When all those little compounding things all pile up, you really can't be your true self in the workplace. And then ultimately that stops you from reaching your true potential and goal. And I think definitely the majority and the onus should be on people in the workplace, especially the allies, to show and share how they can make a much more, I guess, inclusive culture that plays to that.
And that's the difference between non-racist and anti-racist. It's being active and recognizing that sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable. And we have to lean into that. We're uncomfortable in so many other aspects of life. So why do people run away from having those conversations? That sometimes we need to lean into that to be able to self-reflect, but also move past it.
I also think that, an active part of true allyship is also that place of listening. We're talking about some experiences, for that 1% that said, it's not something that we should talk about. This isn't new. It's just louder You know, this is something that has been said, and I've been saying, we've all been individually saying, but it is the collective loudness of so many voices who are telling you the same thing, that actually people are finally listening, or can finally hear it, because the whole world has stopped. So for me, being an active, engaged ally, and we'll discuss how I feel about the word ally later, but I really need you to hear when people are speaking and they're sharing their experiences, not to be dismissive and to say, oh, well, it's not like that anymore. Not to, unfortunately, say things like, well, I don't see color, because I can tell you this doesn't wash off and I see it every single day. But to just be mindful that people are sharing something deeply personal that has happened to them. So just believe them, even if you don't have the understanding or the education or the thought of how to support them in that moment, because that's where the work starts, is that someone actually listened to your experience, and then you can try and do the work together. We're more than happy to support, but in the dismissing of people's experiences because it's not something that you know, that is unfortunately a place of allyship, of where it then starts to go wrong, because then it's the voices then start getting louder and louder because they just want to be heard.
Can I just add some stats to this? And then I will stop. So we're talking about this is not happened. This is not anything new. Colonization happened in the 1500s. The concept of racism was developed in Sweden in 1920s. In 72 years ago, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written. 72 years ago in the UK, we had the Windrush. 58 years ago, Martin Luther King made his I Have a Dream speech. And we're here now and we're still talking about it. So it's not anything new. This is something that has been happening. I think that what's happened is that the pandemic has forced us into this space of, during lockdown, we all started asking ourselves these questions. Big, what to some may seem like sudden, but it's not sudden. There's influx of it bubbling to the surface around the world, and I think that's why we're here having these conversations now.
Absolutely, the world stood still and we weren't going about our busy lives as we are, and it suddenly made us see things that have always been, it's almost like it's erupted from this, you know, the underneath the pipelines or whatever, but we're now seeing things that have always been there and existed for what they truly are. And I'm just conscious because we've got some really good questions and I definitely want to get to Q&A. So let's launch our final poll for our final discussion and then we'll go into Q&A. So our third poll is, if a person of color or Black colleague told you they felt they had a that they'd been racially discriminated against, and it had negatively impacted their well-being, how confident would you feel that you could support them effectively? So we've got very confident, somewhat confident, neutral, somewhat unconfident, and very unconfident. Take a couple of seconds. Can we share the results, please? Okay, so again, we've got some majority, 53%, somewhat confident, and then we have 21% very confident, 10% neutral, somewhat unconfident, 15%, and very unconfident, 1%. So Ada, Chloe, who would like to respond to this question? Who'd like to go first?
Okay. So how confident am I? I think as I have matured and had my own experiences, so I'm thinking about a way to answer this, my own experiences and my own levels of confidence in responding to those experiences has given me the ability and the language to be able to support others. But it's taken a lot to get here. It's taken a lot of blood, sweat and tears and, you know, heart pounding and sweaty palms of anxiety about being able to step in and support somebody else, especially as somebody who's experienced it and been on the receiving end myself. But it's also knowing that you can't do it alone. And to that point of being an ally, I also question the language of allyship sometimes, because what does that mean? So going on protest marches, Black Lives Matter marches, with a t-shirt and a banner and putting up a Instagram image to say, I was on this protest march. To me, that's not really allyship. Allyship is when we're in this space with friends or colleagues and somebody does or says something that is racist or discriminatory, and you don't step up and you don't support that person in that environment, then that is not allyship. Allyship is you should be able to step in, or you should be able to be a supporter when the cameras aren't watching. You should be able to be that person who you feel uncomfortable that somebody has said something or done something. If you feel uncomfortable, how do you think we feel who have been on the receiving end of this type of behavior since childhood? That to me is about sometimes putting my own fears and anxieties about not being confident aside and just going, this is the right thing to do. This is the right thing to do, because I know what it's like for me, I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of that. And it hurts and it cuts deep. And it has a profound impact on your ability to even want to think about it. If you were in a work environment and you were on the receiving end of some racism, as big or small as it could be, and then you know that the next morning you have to get up and go to work and still work in that environment with those people who have said this, and maybe on several occasions it hasn't been tackled. And when it hasn't been tackled, people feel that they can do that again. They feel that they can say it again because, well, nobody said anything to me, so it's okay. And sometimes people will push it a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further until it blows up. And then as a person of colour in the work environment, when you do finally go and say something to HR or whoever, and you say, well, this is a catalogue of things, people say, well, why didn't you say something before? It's then negating your own experiences. So we talk about microaggressions, but we also have micro invalidations, that our experiences have been invalidated because we're not believed. And so that can you imagine the impact that would have on your psyche, on your well-being, to be a soul body, sometimes a soul person of colour in a space, to have somebody be racist towards you in various ways, to not be believed, and to know that you still have to go in there every day and perform. That has so much, that has such a profound impact on your well-being. But I'm interested to hear what Chloe's thoughts are.
Ada, are you in my therapy session? Oh, okay. Having been that person in some aspects, still continuing to be that person, having, I'm every single answer on that poll at some point at any given moment of the day. I'm confident in speaking about it, but yeah, I haven't been believed. I've just been through an experience where finally, after 5 years, I've been able to, or 3 years, I've been able to tell my truth about something, having been silenced, but I can tell you the emotional onslaught of that is really, really damaging. I'm still dealing with that on a day-to-day basis. I think from a work capacity, especially as someone who has experienced all of these things, and especially when you're from a more marginalized background, and in the work that I do, so, when I'm thinking about, LGBTQ plus people in particular, I'm thinking about, our trans siblings, I'm thinking about right now, our non-binary siblings and everyone who's going towards a Gender Recognition Act, but I'm also thinking about our Black trans, Black LGBTQ plus people and the wider community. I can do it for the wider community, but understand my space within that. And as more marginalized people, the different the different forms of discrimination that we're all going to face. And so I recognize that we all need to be able to support each other. It's the only way that we're actually going to get anywhere. Otherwise, we're never going to get anywhere, and we're going to keep continuing to be in these cycles. So I can't really afford to not help other people, because I didn't get anywhere on my own. And I won't continue to get anywhere on my own, especially as a parent who is raising children, because the old saying, but it's so true, it takes a village, it takes several villages, you know, whether it's the teachers, whether it's the doctors, you name it, they are all collective villages of people, and it takes all of us to be able to help support the next generation. So sometimes I have to find my confidence through others and other communities, but I also am learning, and it's very difficult, to ask for help. You know, I have collectively said recently in the last few months, Black people don't know how to rest, especially if you're African or, you know, African American, because culturally it's just not what we're taught, and we're now unpicking all of that. So I feel like alongside allies, I don't always get it right. Sometimes, you know, I get it wrong even when I'm trying to speak to other people, but it's the intent and how you start, and that you start. Because unfortunately for Black people and people of color, we're never allowed to stop. So we need you to be with us at all times. Otherwise, you know, we're not going to get there, and collectively take each other along. But yeah, I can see we've got about 26 questions, so I'm going to shout.
Yeah, no, thank you both for sharing. I definitely echo both your thoughts. And I think for me, I am all across. I agree with you. There are moments where I'm across the same pole. But for me, I think there's definitely something in the leadership. You know, I feel that in my leadership position, if somebody comes to me about something, I have to find a way, because I have influence in that, to change that. And this is why I'm calling out to specifically leaders. We are all leaders in our own right, but I'm talking about the leaders with the heads of titles, everything in the organization, to really think about when somebody has plucked up the courage to come and say this to you, believe that the fact is that they didn't just wake up and say, I'm going to say it today. It has taken a surmountable amount of braveness and courage to do that. So when someone comes and talks to you or says they have been impacted in that way, you need to now think about, as a leader of this organization, whether it's in a department, a team, or whatever, what do I need to do, and what can I do to make sure that that individual or anybody else does not experience it that way, even if it's the fact of making sure that the individual knows that they're being heard and something is being done about it. That is what has to happen. So for me, ultimately, that's my first approach. Even if I'm having a day where I'm going through it myself and have been on the other side experiencing it, there's times where I have to just say, you know what, we have to do this for each other, and we have to be there for each other, and we need to find that influence. And also within your peer group, ultimately educating them and also showing them in terms of role modeling that behavior should give them the courage to do so. So we are running out of time really quickly, and we've got some really great questions. I feel like this is a part 2 coming on, because
I'd like to point out, I did say we're going to run over an hour. I'm a Virgo and a know-it-all. I'm living in my truth.
There's so much here that we need to cover, and so I want to just say, first of all, apologies that we won't get through all the questions, but we will try and answer them offline if possible. And if there is a part 2 somewhere down the line, we could probably pick up the questions and make it a part 2, so we can explore this afterwards. But just want to see some of the questions that we have here. Oh my God, there's a very big one that just came along. Hang on a minute. Okay, so I've got one. In your opinion, can empathy be educated as a skill at all, especially in the workplace? Because sympathy is the easy solution that so many allies choose to use, but empathy will hit and raise the roots. That's one question. Does anyone who would like to take?
Go ahead, Clarissa.
I would say yes, because we all have the capacity to feel, not necessarily always understand, but to feel emotion. And so whenever I do this from a place of pushback, whenever I either haven't been believed or someone has been truly uncomfortable by something that I've said, then I have simply said, imagine if this was you. And I think that's the question that everyone needs to think about when we're having these difficult discussions. Imagine if this was you, and then respond from a place of what you would want. And I think that's where empathy starts. Empathy starts with emotion. So don't listen to respond. Remember I said listen to hear. So if this happened to you, that's the place that I need you to tap into your empathy. Sympathy is you responding to what I said, but not actually hearing what I said.
Yeah, I would agree. I would add that putting yourself in that person's position, but recognizing that that situation, that moment is not the first time it's happened. You've had a lifetime of that. And this may be the time that you decide enough is enough. And that's where I think the empathy, for me, I think that we can create environments that help to nurture that level of empathy and understanding. And I think that that's where it starts, that recognizing if you see a situation, that's not the first time that they would have experienced it, especially if they're an adult. It would have come, that we would have had this experience time and time again in different forms, but a lot of the time it's a very similar experience, a very similar feeling. And so when you want to try and support somebody as an ally or whatever terminology you use, recognize that situation is may be the straw that broke the camel's back at that moment. And that's what you have to feel the weight of it, not just that moment.
So thank you so much. I think my laptop is going dark, so I'm about to just plug it in before we. This is how you know this is real life, people. Like you can't make this stuff up. Note to self: plugging your laptop out. But anyway, my next question, and thank you both for contributing to that question. But my next question is, and we've had several questions around the correct terminology of Black, people of color, BAME, etc. What are your thoughts on that? Chloe, go first.
Okay. From a personal perspective, I'm black, blackity black all the time. From a work capacity, then this is where it gets really, really difficult. I don't particularly like the term BAME because you're trying to describe Black, Asian, minority, ethnic identities within 4 letters of the alphabet, and there are hundreds of different cultures in that. I think we are beholden, unfortunately, a lot by the language that is defined by government and by legalities. And so I would always, in these kinds of conversations, open it out to the audience that you're talking to. And, I would say, I describe myself as Black, but I understand, in a work capacity, we may use BAME, POC, which is people of color, and then just have the wording around that, because I think if you speak to people from Black or ethnic minority backgrounds, we'll all tell you we don't like it. But the reality is that it was written for us, not by us. And we are all doing the things that we actively can to change language and terminology, not just for people of color and Black people, but for many different identities.
Yeah, similar. I'm Black. I will always call myself Black, refer to that with a capital B. And I also don't use the word minority to describe us, because what context are you talking about? Mm-hmm. Talking in the global context, so I don't use the word minority, but I think because a lot of the work that I also do, it is globally. So I tend to, if I'm going to use any descriptors, and I find that to Chloe's point, that these descriptors were thrust upon us rather than we decided what they are, then I tend to use Black and Indigenous people of colour, because a lot of my work is, number one, because a lot of my work is global, and so thinking about the different, people from the global south and various areas, but also people are self-identifying, and I find it really interesting. I've always found it very interesting that it's only people of colour that need to define themselves are made to define ourselves by our colour. Mm-hmm. And that in itself is othering. And it's a form of in a bigger, more complex level, and that would be a whole session on itself, it is a form of othering and discrimination, but we have to have something. And so I think that that is why it is complex, and I don't think anybody's ever going to get one answer, let alone one right answer, because it's such an individual thing that we are trying to identify ourselves without necessarily adding another label that society has put on us. And so it's going to be difficult.
No, I completely agree. And I think anything that is to do with identity is so personal and individual. So I agree. I think that we do need to find something, but I think we need to have the open spaces to ask, what do you see yourself as? I see myself as a Black woman.
Yeah.
I can go on and talk about my heritage, but that's also something that I identify with too. So, you know, I'm conscious of time. So we've got probably like 2 or 3 more questions. How can white people lessen the burden of the issues without speaking on behalf of people of color?
Okay, well, I guess I'll be quick and I'll start. As Ada said it earlier, it's by being in spaces like this and listening and hearing, and then going away and sharing that experience with someone else who's not Black or a person of color. It's going to your structures and inviting in the conversation. If you walk the halls or you look on a Zoom call and you don't see a lot of difference, it's actually by saying, I went to a session like this, I really think it would be a good conversation in the business, and being that spearhead where it's not marginalized people who are actually being the voice, it's you collectively taking our voices. And it's not just, oh look, my screen's gone black now, and it's not just our voices, my laptop's not lit, there we go, it's not just our voices, but it is different voices. So I don't just want you to be bringing, you know, Black and brown voices to your business. I want you to be bringing women. I want you to be bringing parents. I want you to bring difference. That's how we truly create inclusive cultures. So it's from that place for me.
Yeah.
And Ada, can I, before you answer that, just to latch on to the next question that actually is similar, is how do we create sustainable safe spaces to discuss issues of race and racism, to connect to the last question I asked as well? If you could dub both of them together.
I think Chloe covered most of it, but I suppose what I would add is that I will say that we have to recognise that diversity is a given fact, that we as humans would not exist, our physical bodies would not exist without diversity. So that is a fact. Everything else is about choice and about behaviour, inclusion, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to create cultures and spaces that are spaces of belonging, where people feel seen and heard and that they belong. And that goes further than just creating a space of inclusion, because inclusion, you can get to a point of inclusion where it's just check boxes, that we know that our statistics, that we have X percentage of black people, X% of women, X% of this. But we still need to make sure that we're creating spaces where people feel that they're seen and they belong. And that's the difference of really, when you start to think about how you create these spaces, it has to be a whole systemic change to an organisation. Creating a ethnic diversity group and giving them a meeting space and nice coffees and teas is not making any change. That's, in many ways, and it's going to sound quite harsh, but that's patting oneself on the back to say that we've done something. If we really want to make these changes, then we have to go to a completely systemic level, because that's how it becomes sustainable. So look at, you know, the boards of organisations. How many people are on the board? And when you have a board who say that they want to make the change and not just look at recruitment, HR and recruitment procedures and all of these things, a really tough question to ask, but it kind of gives you an idea of where people are at. If you ask that board how many of them are prepared to step down in order to make the changes that they say they want to, because that will tell you how systemic and how sustainable it's really going to be. Because if you want to make these changes, if we want to make these changes, then that needs to come with a power shift and an economic shift and a culture shift and all of those things.
And it's all time.
Yeah.
It's not just when it's, you know, because we're about to go into Black History Month, so it's not just in the month of October, it's not, you know, just when we're having these kinds of conversations, it's all the time, and when people aren't looking.
Yeah.
That's really when you need to do it the most, and without an expectation of a pat on the back either. We're all trying to collectively make change, so that it should be active and always.
Well, because if it's just done during Black History Month or when George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, then that is performative allyship.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't make a change. And what we're trying to do is make that change on a systemic level for all of us.
No, 100%. And I do need to end this here, as much as I'm really enjoying our Q&A session, because I've been told it's video time. And I know there was a question from our about mental health first aiders and how they can support people of colour and Black people. And it's essentially, I mean, we are doing some training, and we'll be doing some training with that community of cohorts. So do watch out for that. But the guidance that we just launched today should also help whoever asked the question from mental health aid perspective should also help you and give you some guidance on how to do that. So I guess it's video time now, I've been told. So we're going to play a short video of Chloe and Simon. So Chloe, if you really don't want to, you can turn off your screen. But this is a short video clip of Chloe and Simon talking about.
And I haven't seen this yet either.
Debut moment. Oops, there might be some technical glitches. I can't hear anything.
I think there's a button that needs to be pressed.
Yes, I think the speaker button.
Reprieve.
Sorry, we're laughing because we're getting these little, as you know, I'm sure people have been on this, but we will be moving on. So we're laughing because we just got a little pop-up note telling us to move on because clearly the video is not working. We will share the video afterwards, so apologies for that. Oh, we could have a couple more sessions for questions, but you know, this is a live recording, so you know, anything could happen. So yes, let's move on quickly because I'm also conscious that we are at time. As I mentioned actually just previously before we were about to show the video, is we have today launched a guidance on how to support the mental health people of colour and Black colleagues. It is available to download on our website, mhfaengland.org/mywholeself. Really want to again thank BITC and CMI for their involvement in helping us shape this document, but it's very much a guidance for managers to lead with empathy and how everybody else can support through checking with colleagues, listening non-judgmentally, and signposting to need it when needed. So do feel free to download the guidance available on our website, and also on we're having a second webinar on the 1st of October that again looks around how we support people of colour and Black people in the workplace, and also looking a bit more about what we're talking about here in context. We will hopefully have a different panelist, but we might invite and re-invite some of our panelists here today. So just on that note for me to end, but before I do, here are some other useful links and resources that you can again all find, predominantly most of them on our website. In terms of COVID, the ethnicity and economical impact, you can go to bitc.org's website for that. And then we've got some more free resources. So can I just take, sorry, I was just looking at what I need to say next, apologies. But yeah, so these are all resourceful free links for you to use. So do have a look at it. And again, our guidance is again is on our website. So I think without further ado, unless there's another slide that I'm not covering, I would love to take this opportunity to thank Ada and Chloe for being here today and to really boldly answer questions really openly. I really respect that and really welcome that. I think that's great. And I think a lot of people have taken away from our conversation and discussion today. We've not had enough time, I know, but hopefully we'll be able to revisit a part 2 at some point. But again, sign up to our 1st of October webinar, which will actually talk a bit more about different things in detail. And if you would like to, and again, respond to anything, feedback, our email workplace@mfhaengland.org is there again, and you will get a link to this recording afterwards. So thank you all for joining, and I hope you have found this really fruitful, really insightful, and also really educational. And so on that note, have a great day, and thank you all again.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.